Hey guys, so a lot of you have been asking me about a Mage PvE build. Um, Now, this is focused on pretty much purely for dungeoning. Um, you should be using the Ice Mage build for everything else, farming mobs, doing the hunts, um, grouping in general, just PvP, everything. You should be using that Ice build at least until it's changed, and I'll update it then. But for now, this is the strongest PvE dungeon build for the mage that I've been able to put together. It's incredibly powerful, and it doesn't have any mana issues if you play properly. It's also the hardest build in the entire game, and it takes a lot of practice to get used to. So I'm going to go ahead and get into that, and hopefully you guys can understand, because there's a lot of things that are going to be said that you're going to have to remember. So we can go ahead and start with the ability tree. You can go ahead and copy paste this. This is the best tree that I have made thus far with the points that I have available for this specific build. The main one is the increase in critical damage, which we will be critting quite a bit in this build, so this ends up actually being worth it. Moving on to the non-chain skills, you don't need to see this counterspell. It's pretty much worthless. You only need to really have 3 abilities here. And they're all required. So the first required one, of course, is Blink Enhancement 3 with the mana regeneration effect attached to it. That's in every mage build pretty much nowadays. Disenchantment with a 30% increased spell power is, of course, another big one that's required, especially for PvE. You're going to want to be using this off cooldown as much as you can. And Distortion with the Enhancement 3, Stage 1, simply for the immunity to all damage. Now, this build doesn't have a whole lot of survivability into it, not only with the ability tree, but also our non-chain skills that we've taken. There's not a whole lot that we have to survive with. And we're not going to be using blinks as a defensive cooldown, we're using it for DPS. So there's some bosses that have some mechanics that could result in your death unless you use Distortion. And of course, it does also reduce threat, and maybe there's some AoE going on and you get caught out by accident, you can use this to save yourself. So it's actually very useful in PvE, especially in dungeons. Moving over to the stance chain skills. This build utilizes a fire tactic and a mixed stance tactic. So again, it would be the mixed tactic and flame tactic here. So you're gonna want to head and put points into the conversion effect for the flame tactic, max points into magic shot for the mana regeneration. Moving over to branch, we're going to want to be putting in reduced cooldown, at least 3 nodes for the incineration. We do this for a reason, and it's required. We need those required at least 3 cooldown reduction nodes to incineration. Reduced cast time for fire explosion is really nice, but it's not required. What is required is the fire eruption for the max cooldown reduction, which we'll get into later. This is our AoE portion of dungeons. This is useful for that. Moving over to mixed tactic, you want some points into damage across the board for Ice Flame and Fireball, and reduced cast time for Fire Explosion. At least 3 nodes. You also want to put damage into Incineration and damage into Fire Meteor. Now, if we move into the chain, which we're going to be utilizing quite a bit, there is one chain that we're going to be focused on. Especially with the buffs coming into chain bonus damage, this is something that we'll have to keep our eye on, definitely. So the way it works is very simple. When you start the fight, there's a number of things that you're obviously going to want to do. So one of those things is using Disenchant for the DPS increase off the bat. Now, there is a certain starter chain that you want to do as well, and it kind of sets everything into motion. The starter chain is the strongest one that we have available to our flame spec, which is Kindle into Incinerate into Fire Explosion. After we're done with this chain, we continue the combo by swapping to mixed tactic. Now, when we swap, we benefit from the 40% increased critical strike rate from flame tactic. After it's improved, of course. It doesn't say on the tooltip right now. And if we happen to have an extra 1000 fire element saved from maybe mobs before we killed this, before we get to the boss, or under any scenario, if you have an extra 1000 fire element, it'll help apply basically a damage over time ability whenever a fire skill makes a crit, which we're also going to be focusing on here in Mixed Tactic. So after you use your first chain, you swap to Mixed Tactic, and then you start with Ice Flame, Fireball, and Fire Explosion. That's the full chain. It ends up being a chain of 6. And after this point, there's a few questions you have to ask yourself. If you're good on mana, you can go ahead and use Static Charge, Incinerate, and Fire Meteor. If you're not good on mana, that's something you have to ask yourself. Should I be using Blink? Instead of chaining, it would be worth more if you blinked instead to regenerate your mana, because mana is very important and it'll mess you up if you're not doing it properly in this build. So if you're doing fine, which would be over half, you don't need to blink. If you're under half, you should probably blink a few times. Now, before you switch stances anyway, which you should be switching stances every single time you have the ability to, which is every 10 seconds, check to see if you have Disenchant available. If Disenchant is available, you use it before you swap stances, simply so that the next combo chain that you do will end up being stronger overall. So you would use Disenchant, swap back to Flame Tactic, do the Kindle, Incinerate, Fire Explosion again, and from this point it changes. It changes now because you have to be worried about your mana. You have to ask yourself, is it worth more to blink, to use Magic Shot if you need mana? Should you use a Magic Shot chain, Magic Shot spam, or are you good on mana to begin with? If you're good on mana, you can Fiery Eruption, Flame Shot, Fiery Meteor, and then spam a few Magic Shots before you continue into the next stance, right? If you're continuing into the next stance, do you have enough time to do, like, for instance, a Magic Shot, Flame Shot, Magic Absorption if that's all you have? Or should you do the Incinerate, Fiery Meteor? Again, if you're good on mana and the stance is about to come up, you can do Magic Shot, Flame Shot, Magic Absorption because it's slightly faster than using Incinerate, Fire Meteor. This is the highest damage chain right here for this ability, and this is the lowest one, but it's faster, right? So you're going to want to be chaining it anyway. Doesn't matter what it is, because we want the chain bonus skill before you swap into Mixed Tactic to use the Ice Flame, Fireball, and Fire Explosion. And again, you check and see if you have the ability to restore mana if you need to with blinks, or if you can go ahead and just use Static Charge into Incinerate, into Fire Meteor again, check to see if you have Disenchant, swap back, and you basically repeat. It's a series of checks and balances to make sure that you're doing the maximum amount of damage that you possibly can, and that you're using your Magic Shot correctly in order to recover mana. You should never be in a situation where you're out of mana because it'll ruin your chain skills. Then, of course, you Disenchant, you chain into something if you possibly can, swap into Mixed Tactic again, Ice Flame, Fireball, Fire Explosion. The general idea behind the build is that you're going to have two phases. A phase in Flame Tactic, where if you have excess mana, you can use it for damage. If you do not have excess mana, this is your mana recovery phase. When you swap, this is your burst phase in Mixed Tactic. This is where the majority of your damage is going to be coming from this stance in specific, because of the additional crit chance you got from swapping. At the end of the stance, of course, you have nothing to combo into. You don't need to combo into anything in the fire stance simply because the damage isn't there to make it worthwhile. So you can use this time to say, okay, do I need to blink? Is my Disenchant up? What's going on here? Swap stances, and again, you repeat that same tree, and then you can branch out and see if you have good mana, you can Fiery Eruption into one of those, or you can Magic Shot spam, or you can Magic Shot into a chain, and then make sure that, if you have Disenchant again, use Disenchant, and then you chain, swap stance into Mixed Tactic. So that's the way it works. It's a little confusing. You're going to have to figure it out for yourself for the most part, but what this build is basically designed in such a way with the cooldown reduction that you have options available to you, and everything will feel smooth if you do it properly. You'll never feel like you'll have to wait for something for the most part in this build. Now, for the AoE portion of things, it's a little bit more free. You don't have to worry about chaining anything. You can't chain anything because swapping into mixed tactic for AoE is pretty useless. There's nothing in there really. So you don't have to worry about chains. The end skill for most of Fire's chains are AoE. So you have Flame Strike, Fiery Meteor, the Fire Explosion with the additional surrounding damage done. You have, well, not incandescent. Yeah, not that. But you have, for instance, Ignition to spread burn. You have the Fiery Meteor. You have an AoE Fireball again. And then, of course, you have more Fiery Meteors, more area effect Fireballs. You can spread Kindle like it's no one's business with the bunch of ignitions that you have in the build already. So it's just managing, using everything. So basically, if you were to start a fight, you use Fire Eruption, Ignition, Flame Strike, right? Then you could use, for instance, a Kindle, area effect Fireball into Ignition to spread that to everybody. If you need mana, you can do Magic Shot into Incineration into Fire Meteor. There's a bunch of things that you can do with fire, and you just have to figure out what's working best for each situation, and you'll get that in time with enough practice. But I know that the combo is a little confusing. I know that there's going to be questions that you guys have to ask, and if you ask them, I'll be more than willing to try to answer them as best as I possibly can in a general sense. If you guys have any questions about what I'm doing, if you're trying to join the guild, this is a hardcore guild that I'm playing with, so I do crunch these numbers a lot for a lot of people, and a lot of people take advantage of that. So if you are willing to join the guild and you are hardcore, send me a message or leave a comment on the YouTube page, or actually just send me a message on YouTube, and obviously you give me your contact information for that, and we'll see about getting you on a waiting list, because right now we do have 18 people who are on a waiting list to join the guild because it's not high enough level yet. But that pretty much wraps it up. You can check me out at my Twitch. I'm going to be streaming every single day. I usually stream about 8 hours a day, and of course here on YouTube I'm going to be posting updates to this and every other guide that I'll be making from now on. And of course there's new content coming out soon. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this helped. It's going to take a little bit of getting used to. It's not easy at all. Probably the hardest build to play, but it's very rewarding. It's very consistent, and it's probably stronger than every other build out there at the moment for dungeons. So thanks for watching, guys.